The first time Maya heard a piano, she was 6 years old. Her mother had taken her to a small church on the corner of their street, and an old woman with gray hair was playing hymns on a dusty upright piano near the altar. Maya stood there frozen, watching the woman's fingers dance across the black and white keys. She didn't understand how something so beautiful could come from a wooden box. That night, she told her mother she wanted to learn. Her mother smiled sadly and said, "Maybe one day, baby. Maybe one day." That day never came. Maya's mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. They lived in a tiny apartment on the south side of Chicago, where the walls were thin and the winters were cruel. There was no money for piano lessons. There was barely enough money for food, but Maya never forgot that sound. She would hum melodies to herself at night, tapping her fingers on the kitchen table like it was a keyboard, imagining the notes flowing from her hands. When Maya was 10, her mother got sick. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away. Then came the hospital visits, the medicine bottles that lined the counter, the nights when her mother was too weak to get out of bed. Maya would sit beside her, holding her hand, telling her stories about the life they would have one day. A nice house, a garden with flowers, and a piano in the living room, where Maya would play songs just for her. Her mother passed away 3 weeks before Maya's 11th birthday. After the funeral, Maya waited for her father to come. He had left when she was a baby, but she had always believed he would return if something bad happened. She waited by the window for days, watching every car that passed, hoping one of them would stop. None of them did. The landlord gave her 1 week to leave the apartment. She had no relatives, no family friends willing to take her in. The social workers came with clipboards and serious faces, talking about foster homes and group shelters. Maya was terrified. She had heard stories about those places. Stories about kids who went in and never came out the same. So on the night before they were supposed to take her, Maya packed a small backpack with clothes, a photo of her mother, and $47 she had found hidden in a coffee can. Then she climbed out the window and disappeared into the city. The first year on the streets was the hardest. Maya slept in bus stations, under bridges, behind dumpsters and alleys, where no one would look. She learned quickly which shelters were safe and which ones to avoid. She learned how to find food, how to stay invisible, how to survive. The city was cold and uncaring, but Maya refused to give up. Every night, before she closed her eyes, she would whisper to her mother in heaven, "I'm still here. Mama, I'm still fighting." When she was 12, Maya discovered the community center on Halsted Street. It was an old brick building with cracked windows and a faded sign that read, "West Side Arts Academy." Every afternoon, students would arrive for music lessons. Through the dusty glass, Maya could see them sitting at pianos, violins tucked under their chins, fingers moving across instruments she had only seen in pictures. She started coming every day. She would sit on the steps outside, hidden behind a row of bushes, and listen. The sounds that floated through those walls became her only comfort. Scales and arpeggios, classical pieces and jazz standards, the occasional wrong note followed by laughter. Maya absorbed it all. She memorized the melodies, hummed along with the harmonies, let the music wrap around her like a blanket. One evening in late autumn, Maya made a decision that would change her life. The building had gone quiet. The students had left, the teachers had gone home, and the lights inside had flickered off one by one. But Maya noticed that a side door near the back had been left slightly open, her heart pounding in her chest. She slipped inside. The hallway was dark and smelled like old wood and cleaning supplies. Maya moved slowly, her footsteps barely making a sound on the worn carpet. She passed empty classrooms, walls covered with posters of famous composers, until she reached a large room at the end of the hall. And there it was. A grand piano sat in the center of the room, its black surface gleaming in the moonlight that streamed through the tall windows. Maya had never seen anything so beautiful in her life. She approached it slowly, almost afraid that if she moved too fast, it would disappear. Her fingers trembled as she touched the keys for the first time. She pressed one note, then another, then another. The sound filled the room, filled her chest, filled the empty spaces inside her that had been hollow for so long. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She just kept playing, picking out melodies she had memorized from listening outside, letting her hands find their way across the keyboard. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her. "Who's there?" Maya spun around, her heart nearly stopping. An older man stood in the doorway, a mop in one hand and a flashlight in the other. He was the janitor. A heavy-set man with gray stubble on his chin and tired eyes that had seen too much of the world. "Please," Maya whispered, backing away from the piano. "Please don't call the police. I wasn't stealing anything. I just wanted to play. I'll leave. I promise I'll leave." The man didn't move. He just stood there, studying her, taking in her worn clothes, her dirty face, her eyes that were too old for someone so young. "How long you been living on the streets?" he asked quietly. Maya didn't answer. She didn't have to. The man sighed and set down his mop. He walked over to the piano and pulled out the bench. Then, he looked at her and nodded toward the keys. "Well, you gonna play or not?" Maya stared at him, not understanding. "You're not going to make me leave? I've been cleaning this building for 22 years, the man said. "I've seen a lot of kids come through here. Rich kids, mostly. Parents paying good money for lessons. Half of them don't even want to be here. They're just doing what their parents tell them." He paused, looking at her with something she hadn't seen in a long time. "Kindness. But I've never seen anyone look at a piano the way you just did, like it was the only thing in the world that mattered." Maya slowly sat down on the bench. Her hands were shaking. "My name's Howard," the man said, "and I'm here every night until midnight. Building's empty after 7. No one comes in, no one checks." He walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her. "You come back tomorrow. Same time. I'll leave that side door unlocked." Maya couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight with emotion. "One condition," Howard added. "You practice. Really practice. None of this playing around stuff. If you're going to use this piano, you're going to learn it right. Understood?" Maya nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. And so it began. For the next 3 years, Maya returned to that building every single night. She taught herself to read music, using old books she found in the storage closet. She practiced scales until her fingers ached, then practiced some more. She learned Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Mozart. She played in the darkness, with only the moonlight to guide her. And Howard sitting in the corner, pretending to mop the same spot over and over again. No one in the world knew that a homeless girl was becoming one of the most gifted pianists the city had ever seen. But that was about to change. Maya was 17 years old when she saw the flyer. It was taped to a telephone pole outside the community center, flapping in the cold November wind. She almost walked past it. She had learned a long time ago not to hope for things that weren't meant for people like her. But something made her stop. Something made her read the words printed in bold black letters. National Young Musicians Competition. Open auditions. Grand prize. Full scholarship to Thornwood Conservatory of Music. Maya read it 3 times just to make sure she understood. Thornwood was one of the most famous music schools in the country. She had read about it in old magazines she found at the library. Students who graduated from Thornwood went on to play in symphony orchestras, concert halls, stages all over the world. It was the kind of place that changed lives, and the auditions were open to anyone. That night, Maya told Howard about the competition. He was sitting in his usual spot in the corner of the practice room, a cup of coffee in his hand and a newspaper spread across his lap. When she finished talking, he was quiet for a long moment. "You sure about this?" he asked finally. Maya nodded. "I've been practicing for 3 years. Every single night. I know I'm ready." Howard folded his newspaper and looked at her. His eyes were serious. "It's not just about being ready to play, Maya. It's about being ready for everything else. The people at these competitions, they come from a different world. They've got money, training, connections. They're going to look at you and see someone who doesn't belong. I know. Maya said quietly. And you still want to do it? Maya thought about her mother, about the promise she had made to herself all those years ago, about every cold night she had survived, every meal she had skipped, every moment she had spent invisible to the rest of the world. I have to, she said. This might be my only chance. Howard was quiet again. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. He held it out to her. Go to the thrift store on Michigan Avenue, he said. Get yourself something nice to wear. Something that makes you feel like you belong on that stage. Maya tried to refuse, but Howard wouldn't take no for an answer. So the next morning, she walked 12 blocks to the thrift store and spent 2 hours searching through the racks. She finally found a simple black dress that fit her perfectly. It had a small tear near the hem, but she fixed it with a needle and thread she borrowed from the shelter. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize the person staring back at her. For the first time in years, she looked like someone who mattered. The day of the audition arrived faster than Maya expected. She woke up before sunrise, her stomach twisted with nerves. She washed her face in the bathroom of a gas station, brushed her hair until it was smooth, and put on her black dress. Then she took the bus downtown to the Riverside Performing Arts Center, where the competition was being held. The building was enormous. Glass walls stretched up toward the sky, and a red carpet led from the entrance all the way to the main doors. Maya stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the other contestants arrive. They came in expensive cars, dressed in designer clothes, carrying instrument cases that probably cost more than everything Maya owned. Parents walked beside them. Coaches whispered last-minute advice. Photographers snapped pictures for what Maya assumed were college applications and social media posts. She had never felt more out of place in her life, but she went inside anyway. The registration area was packed with people. Maya joined the line and waited, trying to make herself as small as possible. The girl in front of her was talking loudly on her phone about her private lessons in Paris. The boy behind her was bragging to his father about the Steinway grand piano his family had just purchased. When Maya reached the front of the line, the woman behind the desk barely looked at her. Name? The woman asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Maya. Maya Chen. The woman typed something, then frowned at the screen. It says here you have no formal training. No teacher listed. No school affiliation. She finally looked up, and her eyes traveled slowly from Maya's second-hand dress to her worn shoes. Are you sure you're registered for the right event, honey? This is the national competition. Maya felt her face grow hot. Yes, ma'am, I'm sure. The woman raised an eyebrow but handed her a number anyway. 47. Maya pinned it to her dress and walked into the waiting area. The room was filled with at least 100 other contestants. All of them warming up, stretching their fingers, reviewing sheet music. Maya found an empty seat in the corner and sat down, clutching her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. She had been sitting there for only a few minutes when she heard the laughter. A group of students had gathered near the water fountain, maybe 5 or 6 of them. They were all looking in her direction. One of them, a tall boy with slicked-back hair and an expensive watch on his wrist, was whispering something to the others. They laughed again, louder this time. Maya tried to ignore them. She stared at the floor, counting the tiles, focusing on her breathing. But then the boy's voice cut through the noise of the room, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Look at her. She probably wandered in off the street. Does she even know what a piano is? More laughter. Maya's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. She had survived worse than this. She had slept in the rain and gone days without eating. A few cruel words from rich kids weren't going to break her. But then another voice joined in. A girl this time, with perfectly curled hair and a violin case at her feet. Someone should tell her this isn't a charity event. She can't play. It's embarrassing. The words hit Maya like a punch to the chest. She can't play. She had heard those words before, in different forms. Her whole life. She can't afford lessons. She can't go to school. She can't have a normal life. She can't. For a moment, Maya wanted to run. She wanted to tear off her number and disappear back into the streets where no one would judge her, where no one would look at her like she was nothing. Her legs tensed, ready to move. But then she thought about Howard, about the way he had believed in her when no one else did, about the $20 bill he had given her, probably his last until payday, about all those nights he had stayed late just so she could practice. And she thought about her mother, about the promise she had made on that last night in the hospital, holding her hand as the machines beeped and the light faded from her eyes. "I'm going to make you proud, Mama. I promise." Maya unclenched her fists. She sat up straighter. She looked directly at the group of students who were still laughing and whispering, and she held their gaze until they looked away. She wasn't going anywhere. The hours crawled by. One by one, contestants were called to the stage. Some came back smiling. Others came back in tears. The boy with the expensive watch returned, looking smug, telling everyone who would listen that he had nailed it. The girl with the violin gave a small bow to her admiring friends. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a voice came over the loudspeaker. "Number 47, please report to the main stage." Maya stood up. Her legs felt weak. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. But she walked forward anyway, one step at a time, toward the doors that led to the stage. Behind her, she heard someone whisper, "This should be good." Maya pushed open the doors and stepped into the light. The stage was bigger than anything Maya had ever seen. Bright lights hung from the ceiling, so intense that she could barely see the audience beyond the first few rows. The auditorium stretched back into darkness. Hundreds of seats filled with people she couldn't make out, but she could feel them. She could feel their eyes on her, watching, waiting, already judging. In front of the stage sat 3 judges behind a long wooden table. They had microphones, stacks of paper, and expressions that gave nothing away. Maya recognized the woman in the middle from photographs she had seen in music magazines at the library. Dr. Elizabeth Hart. She was one of the most respected composers and music educators in the country. She had trained students who went on to win international competitions, perform at Carnegie Hall, play for presidents and kings. Her opinion could make or break a musician's career. Maya's knees felt like they might give out, but she forced herself to keep walking until she reached the center of the stage. The grand piano sat to her right, its black surface gleaming under the lights. It was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen, even more beautiful than the one at the community center. Dr. Hart looked down at the papers in front of her, then back up at Maya. Her face was unreadable. "You are contestant number 47, she said. It wasn't a question. Maya Chen. "Yes, ma'am," Maya replied. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. Dr. Hart flipped through the pages slowly. The silence in the auditorium was heavy, almost suffocating. Maya could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. "It says here that you have no formal training, Doctor," Hart continued. "No private teacher. No conservatory background. No school affiliation whatsoever." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Is this information correct?" Maya swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am, it's correct." A murmur rippled through the audience. Maya didn't have to see their faces to know what they were thinking. The same thing everyone always thought when they looked at her. That she didn't belong, that she was wasting their time. The judge to Dr. Hart's left, a thin man with silver glasses and a pinched expression, leaned forward. "Young lady, this competition attracts the finest young musicians in the nation. Students who have been training since childhood, students with years of professional instruction." He glanced at his colleagues, then back at Maya. "With all due respect, how do you expect to compete at this level without any formal education?" Maya opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could she say? That she had taught herself in an empty building at night? That her only teacher was a janitor who mopped floors for a living? That she had learned to read music from books she found in a storage closet? They would laugh at her, just like the students in the waiting room. The third judge, a heavy-set man with a gray beard, shook his head slowly. "I think we've seen enough," he said. "Perhaps it would be best if, please, The word escaped Maya's lips before she could stop it. It hung in the air, fragile and desperate. The judges fell silent. The audience fell silent. Even the lights seemed to dim for a moment. Maya took a shaky breath. Her hands were trembling at her sides, but she forced herself to speak. "I know what you see when you look at me," she said. "You see someone who doesn't belong here, someone who doesn't have the right background, or the right training, or the right clothes. And maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong here." She paused, feeling the weight of every eye in the auditorium pressing down on her, but she didn't stop. "I don't have a fancy teacher. I don't have parents who paid for lessons. I don't have a piano at home. I don't even have a home." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she pushed through. "I learned to play in an empty building at night, after everyone else had gone. I taught myself from books that were falling apart. I practiced until my fingers bled, because it was the only thing that made me feel like I was still alive." Dr. Hart's expression shifted. Just slightly. Just enough for Maya to notice. "Music saved my life," Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. "When I lost my mother. When I had nowhere to go. When the whole world treated me like I was invisible. Music was the only thing that stayed. The only thing that made me believe I could be something more than what people saw when they looked at me." She took another breath, steadying herself. "I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just asking for 5 minutes. 5 minutes to show you what I can do. And if I'm not good enough, I'll walk out of here and never bother anyone again. But please." Her eyes met Dr. Hart's, and she held her gaze. "Please, just let me play." The auditorium was completely still. No one moved. No one whispered. It was as if the whole world had stopped spinning, waiting for what would happen next. Dr. Hart studied Maya for a long moment. Her face was impossible to read. The other two judges exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable, clearly ready to send this strange girl away and move on to the next contestant. But then Dr. Hart did something unexpected. She smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. And when she spoke, her voice was softer than before. "You have 5 minutes," she said. Maya felt the air rush out of her lungs. She almost couldn't believe what she had heard. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." She turned and walked toward the piano. Her legs felt like they were moving through water, each step slow and deliberate. The bench was cool beneath her as she sat down. The keys stretched out before her, white and black, waiting. Maya placed her hands on the keyboard. They were still trembling. She could feel the heat of the stage lights on her face, the pressure of hundreds of strangers watching her every move. In a few seconds, she would either prove everyone wrong or confirm everything they already believed about her. She closed her eyes. She thought about her mother. About the first time she heard a piano in that little church on the corner. About the nights she spent hungry and cold, dreaming of a different life. About Howard, who had given her a chance when no one else would. About every person who had ever looked through her like she was nothing. And then she thought about the music. The melodies that had kept her company in the darkness. The notes that had filled the empty spaces in her heart. The sound that had made her believe, even in her lowest moments, that she was worth something. Maya took one final breath, and then she began to play. The first note rang out through the auditorium, pure and clear, cutting through the silence like a beam of light through shadow. Then came the second note, and the third. And suddenly, Maya wasn't on a stage anymore. She wasn't in front of judges or audiences or people who doubted her. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere the music had taken her. The piece she had chosen was Chopin's Ballade, No. 1-inch G minor. It was one of the most difficult compositions ever written for piano. Professional musicians spent years trying to master it. Some never did. But Maya wasn't thinking about that. She wasn't thinking about anything at all. She was just playing. And from the very first measure, everyone in that auditorium knew they were witnessing something they had never seen before. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 floated through the auditorium like a whisper. Soft, gentle, almost hesitant. It was the kind of beginning that made people lean forward in their seats, straining to hear, not wanting to miss a single sound. Maya's fingers moved across the keys with a tenderness that surprised even her. She wasn't thinking about technique or timing or any of the things she had read about in those old music books. She was thinking about her mother. About the way she used to hum lullabies when Maya couldn't sleep. About the warmth of her arms on cold winter nights. About the sound of her voice saying, "Maybe one day, baby. Maybe one day." This was that day. The music began to build. The soft whispers grew into something stronger, something deeper. Maya's hands moved faster now, dancing across the keyboard with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who had never had a proper lesson. The melody rose and fell like waves on an ocean, carrying with it all the pain and hope and longing that Maya had kept locked inside her for so long. In the audience, something was changing. The people who had come expecting to see a homeless girl embarrass herself were sitting in stunned silence. The whispers had stopped. The smirks had disappeared. Even the boy with the expensive watch, the one who had laughed at her in the waiting room, was staring at the stage with his mouth slightly open. Because what they were hearing wasn't just music, it was something else entirely. Something that couldn't be taught in conservatories or measured by competitions. Something that came from a place deeper than training or technique. It came from the soul. Maya reached the first major passage of the piece. A section that required both hands to work in perfect harmony. Fingers flying across the keys at impossible speeds. This was the part where most young pianists stumbled. The part where nerves took over and mistakes crept in. But Maya didn't stumble. She didn't even hesitate. Her hands moved with a certainty that seemed to defy everything the judges thought they knew about music. Every note was precisely where it needed to be. Every chord rang out with perfect clarity. It was as if the piano had become an extension of her body, responding to her thoughts before she even finished thinking them. Dr. Hart leaned back in her chair. Her pen had stopped moving. The notes she had been preparing to write were forgotten. In 35 years of teaching music, she had seen hundreds of prodigies, thousands of talented young musicians, but she had never seen anything like this. This girl wasn't playing the piano, she was speaking through it. The music shifted again. The tempo slowed, and a haunting melody emerged from beneath Maya's fingers. It was the most emotional section of the ballade, a passage that Chopin himself had written during one of the darkest periods of his life. It was music born from loss and grief, and the desperate hope that somehow, somewhere, things would get better. Maya poured everything she had into those notes. She thought about the night her mother died, about the sound of the heart monitor going flat, about standing alone at the funeral, watching them lower the coffin into the ground, knowing that she had no one left in the world. She thought about the first winter on the streets, when she had been so cold that she couldn't feel her fingers, when she had wondered if anyone would even notice if she simply disappeared. Tears began to stream down her face. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall onto her hands, onto the keys, becoming part of the music itself, and she wasn't the only one crying. In the front row, a woman had pressed her hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Behind her, an elderly man was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief, not even trying to hide his tears. All across the auditorium, people who had come expecting entertainment were experiencing something far more powerful. They were feeling Maya's story without knowing a single word of it. The music was telling them everything. Dr. Hart felt something wet on her cheek. She reached up and touched it, surprised to find tears. She couldn't remember the last time music had made her cry. Maybe not since she was a young girl herself, sitting in her grandmother's living room, hearing Chopin for the first time. The thin judge with the silver glasses had removed them entirely. He was staring at the stage with an expression of complete disbelief. The heavy-set judge with the gray beard, the one who had tried to dismiss Maya just minutes ago, was sitting absolutely still, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he was afraid he might fall. The music built toward its climax. Maya's fingers flew across the keys with abandon now, the notes tumbling over each other, in a cascade of sound that filled every corner of the auditorium. It was overwhelming. It was transcendent. It was the kind of music that made people believe in things they had stopped believing in long ago. Maya thought about Howard, About the night he had found her in the practice room and chosen kindness instead of anger. About all those evenings he had stayed late, pretending to mop the same spot on the floor while she practiced. About the $20 he had given her, probably his last until payday, just so she could buy a dress and feel like she belonged. She thought about the students who had laughed at her. About the woman at the registration desk who had looked at her like she was garbage. About everyone who had ever told her she couldn't, she wouldn't, she wasn't enough. And she played. She played for all of them. She played for every person who had ever been told they didn't matter. For every child who had ever gone to bed hungry. For every dreamer who had been laughed at for daring to hope. The final passage approached. Maya's hands crashed down on the keys with a force that seemed to shake the entire stage. The music swelled to an almost unbearable intensity, filling the auditorium with sound so powerful that it felt like a physical presence. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The last note rang out through the silence, hanging in the air for what felt like an eternity. Maya's hands hovered above the keys, trembling. Her face was wet with tears. Her chest was heaving. She had given everything she had. There was nothing left. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The auditorium was completely, utterly silent. Then Dr. Hart did something that no one expected. She stood up. It started slowly. First, Dr. Hart. Then the thin judge beside her. Then the heavyset judge. Then the people in the front row. Then the row behind them. And the row behind that. Like a wave spreading outward from the shore, people rose to their feet, one after another, until the entire auditorium was standing. And then came the applause. It wasn't polite clapping. It wasn't the restrained appreciation of a competition audience. It was something else entirely. It was thunderous. It was overwhelming. It was the kind of applause that shook the walls and rattled the windows and made Maya's whole body vibrate with its power. People were cheering, crying, calling out words she couldn't understand over the roar of sound. The students who had mocked her were on their feet with everyone else, their faces pale with shock. Maya sat at the piano, unable to move, unable to think. She had dreamed of this moment for so long. She had imagined it 1,000 times, lying awake on park benches and shelter cots, wondering if she would ever have a chance to show the world what she could do. But she had never imagined it would feel like this. Dr. Hart was walking toward the stage, still clapping, tears still streaming down her face. She climbed the steps slowly, her eyes never leaving Maya. And when she reached the piano, she did something that would change Maya's life forever. Dr. Hart stood in front of Maya, the applause still thundering around them. Up close, Maya could see the tears glistening on the older woman's cheeks. Her eyes were red, her composure completely gone. This was not the stone-faced judge who had questioned her just minutes ago. This was someone who had been deeply, profoundly moved. The applause slowly began to fade. People returned to their seats, wiping their eyes, still staring at the stage in disbelief. The auditorium grew quiet again, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Dr. Hart reached up to her neck. Her fingers found a delicate silver necklace that hung there, a small treble clef pendant catching the light. She unclasped it slowly, holding it in her palm for a moment, looking at it like it was the most precious thing she owned. "My mother gave this to me," Dr. Hart said, her voice barely above a whisper. The microphone on the judge's table picked up her words, carrying them through the silent auditorium. "She gave it to me the day I was accepted into my first conservatory. I was 17 years old, just like you." Maya didn't move. She couldn't. Her hands were still resting on the piano keys, frozen in place. "She told me to wear it whenever I performed," Dr. Hart continued. "She said it would remind me why I started playing in the first place. Not for fame, not for money, not for applause, but because music has the power to touch people's souls, to make them feel things they forgot they could feel." She stepped closer to Maya and gently placed the necklace around her neck. The silver treble clef rested against Maya's chest, cool and light. "I have been teaching music for 35 years, Dr. Hart said, turning to face the audience. Her voice was stronger now, filled with an emotion that made people lean forward in their seats. I have trained hundreds of students. I have judged countless competitions. I have heard performances that were technically flawless, performed by young people with the best training money can buy. She paused, looking back at Maya. But I have never, in all my years, heard anyone play with that much soul, that much truth, that much heart. Her voice cracked on the last word. This young woman did not learn piano. She became it. And I am honored, truly honored, to have witnessed what happened on this stage today. The applause erupted again, even louder than before. People were on their feet once more, cheering, crying, calling out Maya's name. The other judges had risen from their seats, clapping along with everyone else. Even the boy with the expensive watch was applauding. His earlier arrogance completely erased. Maya sat at the piano, overwhelmed. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling now. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she was truly, completely happy. The results were announced an hour later. Maya had received a unanimous, perfect score from all three judges. It was the first time in the competition's 40-year history that such a score had ever been given. The scholarship to Thornwood Conservatory was hers, but that wasn't all. After the ceremony, Dr. Hart pulled Maya aside. She explained that she wanted to personally mentor her. She would help her prepare for Thornwood. She would introduce her to the right people. She would make sure that Maya's talent was recognized not just today, but for years to come. You have a gift, Dr. Hart told her. A rare, extraordinary gift. And the world deserves to hear it. That night, Maya went back to the community center one last time. Howard was there, mopping the floor like he always did. When he saw her walk through the door, still wearing her black dress, the silver necklace gleaming at her throat, he stopped and leaned on his mop. "Well?" he asked. Maya couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears filling her eyes again. Howard smiled. It was the first time she had ever seen him really smile. His whole face lighting up with a warmth she hadn't known was there. "I knew it," he said quietly. "I knew it from the first night I heard you play." Maya ran to him and hugged him tight. He stood there awkwardly for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her, patting her back the way a father might. "Thank you," Maya whispered. "Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me," Howard said, pulling back to look at her. "You did this yourself. I just left a door unlocked." The years that followed were like something out of a dream. Maya graduated from Thornwood, at the top of her class. She performed at concert halls across the country, then across the world. She played at Carnegie Hall when she was 22, standing on the same stage where the greatest pianists in history had stood before her. The reviews called her a prodigy, a genius, a once-in-a-generation talent. But Maya never forgot where she came from. When she was 25, she returned to Chicago. She walked down the same streets where she had once slept in doorways and searched for food in dumpsters. She stood outside the same community center where she had learned to play, now closed down and boarded up. And she made a decision. Using the money she had earned from her performances, Maya bought the building. She renovated it from top to bottom, installing new pianos, new practice rooms, new everything. And when it reopened 6 months later, it had a new name. The Hope Music Academy. It was a free music school for homeless and underprivileged youth. Any child who wanted to learn could walk through the doors and receive lessons from professional musicians. No questions asked. No fees. No requirements. Just a love of music and a willingness to learn. On the day of the grand opening, Maya stood at the entrance and watched as dozens of children streamed through the doors. Some of them looked just like she had once looked. Worn clothes, tired eyes, hungry faces. But when they saw the pianos, the violins, the guitars, something in their expressions changed. Something sparked to life. Maya understood that spark. She had felt it herself, all those years ago. Howard was there too. He was older now, his hair completely gray, his movements slower than before. But he had come all the way from his retirement home in Florida, just to see this moment. "You did good, kid," he said, standing beside her. Your mama would be proud. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. She reached up and touched the silver treble clef that still hung around her neck. I hope so, she whispered. That night, after the guests had left and the children had gone home, Maya sat down at the old piano in the corner of the main room. It was the same piano she had played all those years ago, now restored and polished. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The melody floated through the empty building, soft and gentle, filling every room and hallway. It was Chopin's Ballade. No. 1. The same piece that had changed her life. But it sounded different now. There was still pain in the music, still longing and loss. But there was something else too. Something new. There was peace. Outside, a small girl with tangled hair and dirty shoes stood on the sidewalk, listening through the window. Her eyes were wide with wonder, her lips slightly parted. She had never heard anything so beautiful in her life, and somewhere deep inside her, a dream began to form. Above the entrance to the building, a sign hung in the moonlight. It read, "They said she couldn't play. She played anyway." And every night, when the world grew quiet and the stars came out, the music continued. Because some stories don't just end, they become the beginning of someone else's.